I think back to the years where I was struggling through infertility, and it never ceased to amaze me how many creative and endless ways my brain could come up with the worst case scenario in every situation. I would be constantly telling myself, it's never going to happen. You've left it too late. You're too old. Your eggs are too old. Why didn't you start trying sooner? You shouldn't have eaten that piece of cheese or had that glass of wine. You shouldn't have let your husband have 2 beers on the weekend. Why have I been doing all of the wrong things where I should have been going to this doctor from the get-go? If you can relate to any of this, you can probably feel in my voice how stressful and endless this feels. Because the list goes on, and if any of this feels familiar to you, then you are in the right place for today's episode, because having these thoughts means that you are human. It is normal. But it can make your life really miserable at the same time when you're trying to conceive. So today on this episode, I'm going to help you stop that loop of endless negative thoughts and show you how to use your mind to support yourself instead. Welcome to your journey to fertility. This is the podcast that blends science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so that you can stop stressing that you'll never have your baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me today. And this episode was inspired by a conversation that I had with one of my students a couple of weeks ago. And I remember her saying to me, Jen, I just can't turn off that endless voice in my head. It is just constant that, I can't shut off all of these negative thoughts. They just go around and around and around. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I'm driving, I'm at work, I'm trying to fall asleep at night, they just don't stop. And it reminded me so much of every part of my fertility journey, and especially when it got to those later stages where, I had been through cycles of IVF that weren't successful. And then it led to really difficult things in my life. It started to affect my health. I couldn't sleep. I had chronic insomnia. And being in that place where you just can't stop those negative thoughts is really, really difficult. It impacts everything that you're going through. It impacts your ability to focus at work, to have really kind of normal and deep conversations with your partner and your friends. And no one tells us how to get out of that. When your mind is stuck on repeat and you're just waiting for the next shoe to drop, the next piece of bad information to come. So today we are going to go through ways where you can break this cycle and use your brain's powers for good rather than reminding yourself endlessly what could go wrong. Before we get into really going through, how to break this cycle and the ways that you can stop yourself in your own tracks, we need to understand why we have this negative thought loop. And so much, if you are a regular listener of this podcast, you'll know comes back to awareness. Everything that we talk about and all of the tools and the techniques that I give you to help you along the way, we always need to start with awareness. And before we can even know how to stop ourselves from getting into this loop of endless negative thoughts, which I promise we will go through in a lot of detail, we need to understand why. So the first part of this I find is understanding the difference between rumination and problem solving. So ruminating is this idea of replaying the same fear or the same result, or the same outcome over and over again without ever moving forward. It's just on repeat. And you might have conversations with yourself or practice conversations that you're going to have with your doctor or your boss or your friend about something that is really difficult, but you never really get to an outcome. Whereas if we're thinking about things in terms of problem solving, that's where we are trying to find an action or make a choice to make things a little bit different and to be able to really shift our perspective on things. But when we get stuck in this loop of rumination, it really goes nowhere. And this whole journey of trying to conceive, when you're going through infertility and pregnancy loss, it creates so many unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. And even when I first started IVF, I thought, great, this is the big guns. Let's just hand over all of our problems to the doctors. Finally, we have a solution. But then it brought up more problems that I didn't even know were possible. What happens when you don't respond to the IVF medications? What happens when you don't get any embryos? Are there any possibilities for things to be different next time? There are so many unknowns. And this leads to an enormous lack of control. Your brain hates this. Your brain loves control and predictability. That is how it keeps you safe. So when you don't have this lovely, predictable life that you're sitting in the middle of, your brain starts to fill the gaps with these imagined scenarios. So it says, okay, well, let's go through every possible scary or negative outcome so that we are prepared for the worst. And the only reason that your brain is doing this is because it's concerned with your survival. Your brain is only ever trying to protect you. But if you have listened to previous episodes where I've spoken about this idea of your brain trying to protect you, the problem is that it doesn't understand the difference between, well, perhaps there is a tiger that's around the corner that's about to come and jump out and attack me, and I'm terrified that this cycle isn't going to be successful. I'm terrified if I get pregnant again, I'm just going to miscarry again. Your poor brain doesn't understand the difference. So in your own mind, in your subconscious mind, a threat is a threat. So you're going to be hardwired, to keep looking for all of these negative and destructive outcomes in order to keep you safe. I think that as humans generally, we are hardwired to look for the negative. I mean, how many times have you gone to book a restaurant or book a hotel room and you're going and reading all the reviews and you go to all the 1-star reviews first? Like, I'm going to find out what are the absolute worst things about this place first. We really want to know and prepare ourselves for the worst. I think it is just a normal part of our human condition. So now that we know why our brain is doing this, how do we break the cycle? And as you know, I love a list. So I've created what I think are the 4 best ways. So we'll go through a 4-step process here. And this is something that I ended up doing in my own journey, where I was just stuck in this endless cycle and I couldn't get out of it and I had to find a way to break it. And it is something that I go through these days with my students as well. So the first thing that we need to do is cut that loop. So you need to cut those thoughts off. And we need that awareness piece first. We need to know when we are getting stuck in this ruminating cycle. And when we are thinking about all of the worst case scenarios, it is normal for your body to then go into survival mode, into fight or flight mode. So you might find that once you start thinking about everything that could possibly go wrong, we start getting agitated. We can't sit still. Your heart starts to beat a little bit more quickly. You find that your palms get a little bit clammy. You can't focus. This is your fight or flight response. So we need to be aware when that happens. Once you're able to say, okay, look, I am going down this spiral of negative thoughts and I need to do something or it's going to take over the rest of my day or my week, we need to come into a place where you can offer yourself a little bit of compassion. And I find the best way to do this is to reframe this with a you statement. So what I mean by this is to use your name and a gentle tone. And you can literally say the words out loud or just really quietly to yourself. For example, you could say, Jen, you haven't done anything wrong. You could say, Jen, this isn't guaranteed. This isn't the outcome that you know is going to happen. I want you to imagine that you are speaking to someone that you care deeply about, whether it's a really close friend or a family member or even your partner. Imagine what you would say to them. You'd want to put a hand on their shoulder or give them a hug and just be compassionate with them. So I want you to be able to offer that compassion to yourself as well. And when we do this, it it triggers a shift from this very emotional brain and, the part of the brain that is responsible for looking for danger, that amygdala, that very primal part of your brain. And it shifts you into a much more compassionate observer mode. And it is from this more objective side that you can start to create change. So that is where I want you to start, and try it now. Maybe you want to pause this podcast for a few moments, and whatever you've been ruminating about, whatever really scary thoughts have been coming up for you lately, give yourself a moment just to say your name gently out loud and remind yourself that it is not reality. So once you have done that, I love this next point. As we know, I am a little bit of a type A control freak. But when you are feeling so out of control with all of your thoughts, I find that being able to control the controllable, or these like micro sort of like little things in your environment, that is where things start to feel a little bit more manageable. So I love this idea of having a space around you that feels peaceful. Being able to organize your space in your home, or if you're at work, just your workspace around you, even your car, just anything where you spend a lot of time. What is it in this environment that feels good? Does it feel safe? Does it feel calming and peaceful? And if it doesn't, how can we change that? And, whether or not you are, a neat and control freak person like I am, it doesn't matter. But just having space around you that feels manageable is a lot easier than for your brain to then come into a space that is manageable mentally as well. This is something we talk about a lot, and it's one of those boring things that every second expert is always going to be telling you about. But having consistent routines in your life, especially around bedtime, sleep, and a morning routine, are incredibly beneficial. I even notice now that, I have, as you well know, spent many years since my journey of going through infertility and loss, really healing and doing a lot of work to process what I've been through. But these days I find if I've had a few days in a row where I haven't had much sleep, if I'm feeling really overwhelmed, or I've been up late working and I feel quite dysregulated and quite on edge, I go into survival mode really easily. I start thinking like the worst case scenario. I think, oh my goodness, like my kids are going to be taken out in a car accident today. I think they're going to stop breathing while they're sleeping. All of these really irrational things that have no basis in reality. But the more dysregulated I am, the more these thoughts tend to plague me. And those times where I have had good opportunities to rest, I've had a few nights in a row where I've had really consistent sleep. I've gotten outside, I've been exercising. I find I am a lot more present with everything in my life, and all of these big, scary, negative thoughts don't tend to raise their ugly head quite so easily. So that's the second part to this. The third is we want to be able to give the brain little opportunities to recognize that things are okay. So what I mean by this is to really celebrate the small wins and say to your brain, like, look, we can create safety here. These things aren't anything to be concerned about. This is so important. And I find that when we get into this topic, it relates a lot into being able to manifest what you want. And we have an episode about manifesting coming up on the podcast shortly in a few weeks' time. And so when we are talking about these little wins, it's about showing your body that you are on the right path, that you don't need to be constantly worrying yourself with these ongoing thoughts, this loop of endless negative thoughts. So what can we do to show our brains that we are safe and that things are actually okay? For example, I like to write things down. I find that really powerful, but you don't have to. You could keep a little notes app in your phone going. Say to yourself, what has actually been going right for me lately? For example, it could be, my cycle has really regulated recently. It's a lot more predictable. I'm not getting PMS. I am falling asleep quite easily. I find that I'm not waking up through the night. I am able to enjoy going out and exercising a little bit more often. I find I want to nourish my body with really good foods as opposed to just reaching for a bag of chips when I get stressed. So all of these little things that remind our brains that we are safe and that our bodies are doing everything that we need them to be is incredibly powerful. So write all of that down if you can. So these little micro controlled parts of your life I find are really helpful. Just to recap, so organizing the space, making your space around you feel really calm and really safe, keeping that consistent routine and looking after your body, and reminding yourself and your brain of these little small wins, super important as well. So number 3 is expanding on writing down a little bit more and coming into journaling. And I think that journaling is incredibly powerful because it provides so much clarity to our thoughts. There were a few studies done during COVID that I remember reading about, and these researchers took a whole bunch of people who were really struggling with anxiety during COVID and really struggling with these ruminating thoughts and all these negative thought loops, and they were really worried about what was going to happen to them. And they gave them a whole bunch of tools to try and help them through this process, and journaling was one of them. I found that this, more than anything else, helped to stop that endless negative thought loop and really help them calm the mind. So journaling, I find, is just one of the best ways to get all of your thoughts out of your head and onto the page. And when you dump them down on the page, and when you are journaling, you don't have to write anything that's coherent. No one's going to read this. You don't have to use proper spelling or punctuation or grammar. Like, just write in endless sentences. Get everything that you're thinking out onto the page. Because sometimes when we do that, we're able to reflect a little bit and read back over what we've written. It makes us say, okay, well, maybe like that is a bit ridiculous. I know that's not true. It helps us to be a little bit more objective about the things that we're thinking about. But remember that no single tool is ever going to be enough. And, that's why I feel it is so important to have your toolkit. I talk about this idea of a toolkit all the time. And imagine if you were, I'm going to give an analogy I know nothing about. Okay, imagine if you're a plumber and you've rocked up to do a plumbing job with just a hammer. I know nothing about plumbing, but I'm pretty sure you can't do much with just a hammer. You would need your whole box of tools. And that is exactly the way that I want you to look at all of these things that we speak about and all of these little processes that you can take yourself through. So get your toolkit together, and I want you to find what works for you. And journaling is one of those really powerful ones. And it's one I find that we're a little bit resistant to doing because it takes a lot of time and energy, and it's hard. We don't like having to address all of these really difficult things that our brains are thinking about. But it is a very, very powerful tool. So when you have your journal out, you want to be able to give yourself, you can just start writing if you want to, but if you're kind of stuck as to where to start, I find that really short, powerful prompts are a really good way to begin. So for example, what is the story I'm telling myself today? What can I not stop thinking about today? You can ask yourself, is this actually a fact or is it just a feeling? So write down everything that you know is true versus everything that you're just feeling or worried about might be true. So as I said, this moves all of these thoughts out from your head and into a tangible place where we can start to be a little bit more objective. And the last part of this that I want to mention is when you are wanting to find this toolkit and when you're writing everything down, if you feel comfortable, you could ask someone to read this back. And I don't think that's something I would ever feel comfortable doing. I think my crazy thoughts are best left just for my eyes only. If you don't feel comfortable sharing these thoughts with someone, then enlist perhaps a person who is like your crazy thought buddy. So perhaps your partner is a really good person to say, look, I'm just going over and over and over with this and I can't stop. Am I being crazy? How do I stop this endless thought? And just get their feedback and get their thoughts. And I think, as we mentioned, they're going to be able to help you cut that loop with their own compassion as well. The last part of this episode that I want to talk about are just a few gentle reminders. when we are talking about cutting these thoughts and sort of ending those endless negative thoughts we have, it is a journey, and like everything that we're doing to help ourselves throughout our fertility journey, it is a progress. It's a work in progress, and you're not going to get it right every day. And it's not like today you're going to go home and do all of these practices and think, I actually feel really calm and really good, and I've been able to break that cycle today. But you'll go back to it tomorrow and you'll have to start it all over again. So be kind to yourself. Know that this is a work in progress, and it will be. And like I said, it's been years since I have been in this space of struggling with my fertility, but I still get into negative thought spirals. So you are always going to be a work in progress. Please don't think that you have to nail it the first time. There is no right or wrong here either. So you're not going to do it perfectly, and some days you're going to do it better than others. And the days where things are really difficult, if you're getting a negative pregnancy test or you're getting a phone call that's really with difficult news to hear, these are going to be the more difficult days. So perhaps those are the days where you just need to sit with your thoughts and let whatever comes up come up. And that is the only way that you're able to deal with them. Come back to them again when you feel ready, because trying to conceive is an emotional marathon. If it was easy, my work wouldn't exist. This podcast wouldn't exist. Sadly, it does. So it is going to be just an ongoing process of allowing yourself that time and space. And the goal is, it's never to not think negatively ever. That isn't really the goal. It's not so much that I'm never going to have negative thoughts. It's more about, I know I'm going to have negative thoughts, but they're not going to be driving the car. They're not going to be taking over my entire life. I'm going to be able to recognize them, put a circuit breaker into them, and allow myself to move through the rest of my day a little bit more easily. So let's go through those 4 steps again. So first of all, number 1 was to cut the loop straight away with those compassionate you statements. Use your name and use a compassionate sentence afterwards to recognize when you are in that thought spiral. The second is to organize your environment around you. So whether that is your physical space, looking after yourself, being able to set boundaries on getting good sleep and taking a good morning routine. The third is around journaling and being able to get all of those thoughts out, and perhaps if you can share them with someone else as well and get their feedback as well. I find that is an incredibly powerful thing to do. And the fourth is to be compassionate with yourself and to realize that this is going to be an ongoing work in progress. So before we finish up, I want to remind you that you are doing the best you can. Your body and your mind actually want exactly the same thing. Your body wants you to get pregnant. It wants you to have the family of your dreams. We are hardwired, our bodies, to come into this state of homeostasis where everything is working beautifully. So as hard as it feels sometimes, and as much as we think that we're pushing against and fighting against our bodies, they always, always want exactly what we do as well. After listening to this podcast episode today, I want to encourage you to take one small action. So if you can't go through all of these 4 steps today, then I encourage you to try just one of these tools. So whether it's the journaling, whether it's organizing your space, being a little bit more mindful about your bedtime and things that you're doing to improve sleep, whatever it might be, take action and pick just one thing to do this week, even if it is tiny. So thank you so much for being here. Now, next week on the podcast, I get to sit down with Sally Douglas from Good Morning. And if you haven't already listened to the Good Morning podcast, then you absolutely must, because it is an incredible resource for anyone who is navigating the depths of grief. And she's going to be coming on to the podcast next week to talk to us about how hard it is navigating grief where you perhaps have lost someone in your life that a lot of us are probably familiar with, versus the grief that you can't see. So the grief of infertility and pregnancy loss, where the people around you, they can't actually see what you've lost and they don't really understand what you're going through. So she's going to be here to walk us through all of that. So thank you. I appreciate you so much for being here. If you found this episode helpful, then please share it with someone. You never know who else might be struggling in your life. Share it on your social media stories. It is such a wonderful way to help others find the podcast as well. So until next week, I am sending you all of my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility.